The seventh Tuesday, we talk about the fear of aging. Muri lost his battle. Someone was now wiping his behind. He faced this with typically brave acceptance, no longer able to reach behind him when he used the commode. He informed Connie of his last limitation. Would you be embarrassed to do it for me? She said no. I found it typical that he asked her first. It took some getting used to, Muri admitted, because it was, in a way, complete surrender to the disease. The most personal and basic things had now been taken from him, going to the bathroom, wiping his nose, washing his private parts. With the exception of breathing and swallowing his food, he was dependent on others for nearly everything. I asked Muri how he managed to stay positive through that. Mitch, it's funny, he said. I am an independent person. So my inclination was to fight all of this, being helped from the car, having someone else dress me. I felt a little ashamed because our culture tells us we should be ashamed if we can't wipe our own behind. But then I figured, forget what the culture says. I have ignored the culture much of my life. I am not going to be ashamed. What's the big deal? And you know what? The strangest thing, what's that? I began to enjoy my dependency. Now I enjoy when they turn me over on my side and rub cream on my behind so I don't get sores, or when they wipe my brow or they massage my legs. I revel in it. I close my eyes and soak it up, and it seems very familiar to me. It's like going back to being a child again, someone to bathe you, someone to lift you, someone to wipe you. We all know how to be a child, it's inside all of us. For me, it's just remembering how to enjoy it. The truth is, when our mothers held us, rocked us, stroked our heads, none of us ever got enough of that. We all yearn in some way to return to those days when we were completely taken care of. Unconditional love, unconditional attention. Most of us didn't get enough. I know I didn't. I looked at Muri and I suddenly knew why he was so enjoyed my leaning over and adjusting his microphone, or fussing with the pillows, or wiping his tears. Human touch. At 78, he was giving as an adult and taking as a child. Later that day, we talk about aging, or maybe I should say the fear of aging. Another of the issues on my what's bugging my generation list. On my ride from the Boston airport, I had counted the billboards that featured young and beautiful people. There was a handsome young man in a cowboy hat smoking a cigarette. Two beautiful young women smiling over a shampoo bottle. Sultry woman in a black velvet dress. Next to a man in a tuxedo, the two of them struggling a glass of scotch. Not once did I see anyone who would pass for over 35. I told Muri I was already feeling over the hill much as I tried desperately to stay on the top of it. I hairline in the mirror. I had gone from being proud to say my age because of all I had done so young to nod and therefore professional oblivion. Because of all I had gone so young to nod and bringing it up for fear I was getting too close to 40. Muri had aging in better perspective. All this emphasis on youth, I don't buy it. He said, listen, I know what misery being young can be, so don't tell me it's so great. All these kids who came to me with their struggles, their strife, their feeling of inadequacy, their sensed. Their life was miserable, so bad they wanted to kill themselves. And in addition to all the miseries, the young are not wise, they have very little understanding about life. Who wants to live every day when you don't know what's going on, when people are manipulating you, telling you to buy this perfume and you will be beautiful, or this pair of jeans you will be sexy, and you believe them? It's such nonsense. Were not you ever afraid to grow old? I asked. Mitch, I embrace aging. It's very simple. As you grow, you learn more. If you stayed at 22, you will always be as ignorant as you were at 22. Aging is not just decay, you know, it's growth, it's more than the negative that you are going to die, it's also the positive that you understand you are going to die and that you live a better life because of it. Yes, yes, I said, but of aging was so valuable. Why do people always say, oh, if I were young again? You never hear people say, I wish I were 65. He smiled. You know what that reflects? Unsatisfied lives, unfulfilled lives, lives that haven't found meaning. Because if you have found meaning in your life, you don't want to go back. You want to go forward. You want to see more, do more. You can't wait until 65. He smiled. You know what that reflects? Unsatisfied lives, unfulfilled lives. Listen, you should know something. All younger people should know something. If you are always battling against getting older, you are always going to be unhappy because it will happen anyhow. And Mitch lowered his voice. The fact is, you are going to die eventually. I nodded. It won't matter what you tell yourself, I know, but hopefully, he said. Not for a long, long time. Me to adjust the pillows behind his head. His body needed constant adjustment to stay comfortable. It was propped in the chair with white pillows, yellow foam, and blue towels. At a quick glance, it seemed as if Muri were being packed for shipping. Thank you, he whispered as I moved the pillow. No problem, I said. Mitch, what are you thinking? I paused before answering. Okay, I said, I am wondering how you don't envy brother, healthy people. Oh, I guess I do. He closed his eyes. I envy them being able to go to the health club or go for a swim or dance, mostly for dance. Both envy comes to me. I feel it and I don't let it go. Remember what I said about detachment. Let it go. Tell yourself that's envy. Just going to separate from it now and walk away. He carved a long, scratchy cough and he pushed the tissue to his mouth and spit weakly into it. Something there. I felt so much stronger than he, ridiculously so, as if I could lift him and toss him over my shoulder like a sack of flour. I was embarrassed by his superiority because I did not feel superior to him in any case. How do you keep from everything but me? Much it is impossible for the old not to envy the young, but the issue is to accept what you are and reveal in that. This is your time to be in your 30s. I had my time to be in my 30s. I had my time to be in my 30s and now this is my time to be 78. You have to find what's good and true and beautiful in your life as it is now looking forward. and back makes you complete active, and age is not a competitive issue. He exhaled and lowered his eyes as if to watch his breath scatter into the wind. The truth is part of me is every age. I am there. I am 3 years old. I am 5 years old. I am 37 years old. How what is actually? The truth is part of me is every age. I am 30 years old. I am 5 years old. I am 37 years old. I am 50 years old. I have been through all of them and I know what it's like. I delight in being a child when it's appropriate to be a child. I delight in being a wise old man when it's appropriate to be a wise old man. Think of all I can be. I am every age. Up to my own. Do you understand? I nodded. How can I be envious of where you are when I have been there myself? The 8th Tuesday we talk about money. It held up the newspaper so that Muri could see it. I don't want my tombstone to read, I never owned a network. Muri laughed, then shook his head. The morning sun was coming through the window behind him, falling on the pink flowers of the hibiscus plant that sat on the sill. The quote was from Ted Turner, the billionaire media mogul, founder of CNN, who had been lamenting his inability to snatch up the CBS network in a corporate mega deal. I had brought the story to Muri this morning because I wondered if Turner ever found himself in my old professor's position, his breath disappearing, his body turning to stone, his days being crossed off the calendar one by one. Would he really be crying over owning a network? It's all part of the same problem, Mitch, Muri said. We put our values in the wrong things and it leads to very delusional lives. I think we should talk about that. Muri was focused. There were good days and bad days now. He was having a good day the night before. He had been entertained by a local a cappella group that had come to the house to perform, and he relayed the story excitedly as if the ink spots themselves had dropped by for a visit. Muri's love for music was strong even before he got sick, but now it was so intense it moved him to tears. He would listen to opera sometimes at night, closing his eyes, riding along with the magnificent voices as they dipped and soared. You should have heard this group last night. Mitch such a sound. Muri had always been taken with simple players, singing, laughing, dancing. Now, more than ever, material things had little or no significance. When people die, you always hear the expression, "You can't take it with you." Muri seemed to know that a long time ago. We have got a form of brainwashing going on in our country. Muri sighed. Do you know how they brainwash people? They repeat something over and over, and that's what we do in this country. Owning things is good, more money is good, more property is good, more commercialism is good. more is good. We repeat and have it repeated to us over and over until nobody bothers to even think otherwise. The average person is so forged up by all this, he has no perspective on what's really important anymore. Wherever I went in my life, I met people wanting to gobble up something new, gobble up a new car, gobble up a new piece of property, gobble up the latest toy. And then they wanted to tell you about it. Guess what I got? Guess what I got? You know how I always interpreted that these were people so hungry for love that they were accepting substitutes. They were embracing material things and expecting a sort of hug back, but it never works. You can't substitute material things for love or for gentleness or for tenderness or for a sense of comradeship. Money is not a substitute for tenderness, and power is not a substitute for tenderness. I can tell you as I am sitting here dying when you most need it. Neither money nor power will give you the feelings you are looking for, no matter how much of them you have. I glanced around Murray's study. It was the same today as it had been the first day I arrived. The books held their same places on the shelves. The papers cluttered the same old desk. The outside rooms had not been improved or upgraded. In fact, Murray really hadn't bought anything new except medical equipment in a long time, maybe years. The day he learned that he was terminally ill was the day he lost interest in his purchasing power. So the TV was the same old model. The car that Charlotte drove was the same old model, the dishes and the silverware and the towels, all the same. And yet the house had changed so drastically. It had filled with love and teaching and communication. It had filled with friendship and family and honesty and tears. It had filled with colleagues and students and meditation teachers and therapists and nurses and a cappella groups. It had become in a very real way a healthy home, even though Murray's bank account was rapidly depleting. There is a big confusion in this country over what we want versus what we need, Murray said. You need food, you want a chocolate sundae. You have to be honest with yourself. You don't need the latest sports car. You don't need the biggest house. The truth is, you don't get satisfaction from those things. You know what really gives you satisfaction. What? Offering others what you have to give. You sound like a Boy Scout. I don't mean money, Mitch. I mean your time, your concern, your storytelling. It's not so hard. There is a senior center that opened near here. Dozens of elderly people come there every day. If you are a young man or young woman and you have a skill, you are asked to come and teach it. Say you know computers. You come there and teach them computers. You are very welcome there. And they are very grateful. This is how you start to get respect, by offering something that you have. There are plenty of places to do this. You don't need to have a big talent. There are lonely people in hospitals and shelters who only want some companionship. You play cards with a lonely older man and you find new respect for yourself because you are needed. Remember what I said before, finding a meaningful life. I wrote it down, but now I can recite it. Devote yourself to loving others. Devote yourself to your community around you, and devote yourself to creating something that gives you purpose and meaning. You notice he added, grinning. There's nothing in there about a salary. I jotted some of the things Murray was saying on a yellow pad. I said this mostly because I didn't want him to see my eyes, to know what I was thinking. That I had been for much of my life since graduation pursuing these very things he had been railing against. Bigger toys, nicer house because I worked among rich and famous athletes. I convinced myself that my needs were realistic, my greed inconsequential compared to theirs. This was a smoke screen. Muri made that obvious. Mitch, if you are trying to show off for people at the top, forget it. They will look down at you anyhow. And if you are trying to show off for people at the bottom, forget it. They will only envy you. Status will get you nowhere. Only an open heart will allow you to float equally between everyone. He paused, then looked at me. I am dying, right? Yes. Why do you think it's so important for me to hear other people's problems? Don't I have enough pain and suffering of my own? Of course I do, but giving to other people is what makes me feel alive, not my car or my house, not what I look like in the mirror. When I give my time, when I can make someone smile after they were feeling sad, it's as close to healthy as I ever feel. Do the kinds of things that come from the heart. When you do, you won't be dissatisfied, you won't be envious, you won't be longing for somebody else things. On the contrary, you will be overwhelmed with what comes back. He coughed and reached for the small bell that lay on the chair. He had to poke a few times at it. And I finally picked it up and put it in his hand. Thank you, he whispered. He took it weakly, trying to get Connie's attention. This Ted Turner guy, Muri said. He couldn't think of anything else for his tombstone. Each night when I go to sleep, I die, and the next morning when I wake up, I am reborn. Mahatma Gandhi. The ninth Tuesday, we talk about how love goes on. The leaves had begun to change color, turning the ride through West Newton into a portrait of gold and rust. Back in Detroit, the labor war had stagnated, with each side accusing the other of failing to communicate. The stories on the TV news were just as depressing. In rural Kentucky, three men threw pieces of tombstone off a bridge, smashing the windshield of a passing car, killing a teenage girl who was traveling with her family on a religious pilgrimage. In California, the O.J. Simpson trial was heading toward a conclusion, and the whole country seemed to be obsessed. Even in airports, there were hanging TV sets turned to CNN so that you could get an OJ update as you made your way to a gate. I had tried calling my brother in Spain several times. I left messages saying that I really wanted to talk to him, that I had been doing a lot of thinking about us. A few weeks later, I got back a short message saying everything was okay, but he was sorry. He really didn't feel like talking about being sick. For my old professor, it was not the talk of being sick, but the being sick itself that was sinking him. Since my last visit, a nurse had inserted a catheter into his penis, which drew the urine out through a tube and into a bag that sat at the foot of his chair. His legs needed constant tending. He could still feel pain even though he could not move them. Another one of ALS' cruel little ironies. And unless his feet dangled just the right number of inches off the foam pads, it felt as if someone were poking him with a fork. In the middle of conversations, Muri would have to ask visitors to lift his foot and move it just an inch, or to adjust his head so that it fit more easily into the palm of the colored pillows. Can you imagine being unable to move your own head? With each visit, Muri seemed to be melting into his chair, his spine taking on its shape. Still, every morning he insisted on being lifted from his bed and wheeled to his study, deposited there among his books and papers and the hibiscus plant on the window sill. In typical fashion, he found something philosophical in this. I sum it up in my newest aphorism. He said, "Let me hear it. When you are in bed, you are dead." He smiled. Only Mori could smile at something like that. He had been getting calls from the Nightline people and from Ted Koppel himself. "They want to come and do another show with me," he said, "but they say they want to wait until what you are on your last breath." Maybe, anyhow, I am not so far away. Don't say that. I am sorry. That bugs me that they want to wait until you wither. It bugs you because you look out for me, he smiled, which maybe they are using me for a little drama. That's okay. Maybe I am using them too. They help me get my message to millions of people. I couldn't do that without them, right? So it's a compromise. He coughed, which turned into a long drawn out gargle, ending with another globe into a crushed tissue. Anyhow, Muri said, "I told them they better not wait too long because my voice won't be there. Once this thing hits my lungs, talking may become impossible. I can't speak for too long without needing a rest now. I have already cancelled a lot of the people who want to see me, which there are so many, but I am too fatigued. If I can't give them the right attention, I can't help them." I looked at the tape recorder, feeling guilty as if I were stealing what was left of his precious speaking time. "Should we skip it?" I asked. "Will it make you too tired?" Muri shut his eyes and shook his head. He seemed to be waiting for some silent pain to pass. "No," he finally said, "you and I have to go on. This is our last thesis together, you know, our last thesis. We want to get it right." I thought about our first thesis together in college. It was Muri's idea, of course. He told me I was good enough to write an honors project, something I had never considered. Now here we are doing the same thing once more. Starting with an idea, dying man talks to living man, tells him what he should know. This time I was in less of a hurry to finish. "Someone asked me an interesting question yesterday," Muri said now, looking over my shoulder at the wall hanging behind me, a quilt of hopeful messages that friends had stitched for him on his 70th birthday. Each patch on the quilt had a different message. "Stay the course. The best is yet to be. Mori. Always know. Always number one in mental health." What was the question, I asked. "If I worried about being forgotten after I died, well, do you? I don't think I will be. I have got so many people who have been involved with me in close, intimate ways, and love is how you stay alive even after you are gone." Sounds like a song lyric. Love is how you stay alive. Muri chuckled. "Maybe, but Mitch, all this talk that we are doing, do you ever hear my voice sometimes when you are back home? When you are all alone, maybe on the plane, maybe in your car?" "Yes," I admitted. "Then you will not forget me after I am gone. Think of my voice and I will be there. Think of your voice, and if you want to cry a little, it's okay." Muri, he had wanted to make me cry since I was a freshman. One of these days I am gonna get to you, he would say. Yeah, yeah, I would answer. I decided what I wanted on my tombstone, he said. I don't want to hear about tombstones. Why? They make you nervous. I shrugged. We can forget it. No, go ahead. What did you decide? Muri popped his lips. I was thinking of this, a teacher to the lost. He waited while I absorbed it, a teacher to the last. Good, he said. Yes, I said, very good. I came to love the way Muri lit up when I entered the room. He did this for many people, I know, but it was his special talent to make each visitor feel that the smile was unique. Ah, it's my buddy, he would say when he saw me in that foggy, high pitched voice. And it didn't stop with the greeting. When Muri was with you, he was really with you. He looked you straight in the eye and he listened as if you were the only person in the world. How much better would people get along if their first encounter each day were like this, instead of a grumble from a waitress or a bus driver or a boss? I believe in being fully present, Muri said. That means you should be with the person you are with. When I am talking to you now, Mitch, I try to keep focused only on what is going on between us. I am not thinking about something we said last week. I am not thinking of what's coming up this Friday. I am not thinking about doing another Coppel show or about what medications I am taking. I am talking to you, I am thinking about you. I remembered how he used to teach this idea in the group process class back at Brandeis. I had scoffed back then, thinking this was hardly a lesson planned for a university course. Learning to pay attention. How important could that be? I now know it is more important than almost everything they taught us in the college. Muri mentioned for my hand, and as I gave it to him, I felt a surge of guilt. Here was a man who, if he wanted, could spend every waking moment in self pity, feeling his body for decay, counting his breaths. So many people with far smaller problems are so self absorbed their eyes glaze over if you speak for more than 30 seconds. They already have something else in mind, a friend to call, a fax to send, a lover they are daydreaming about. They only snap back to full attention when you finish talking, at which point they say, oh, or yeah, really, and fake their way back to the moment. Part of the problem, Mitch, is that everyone in such a hurry. Muri said, people haven't found meaning in their lives, so they are running all the time looking for it. They think the next car, the next house, the next job they can find, those things are empty too, and they keep running. Once you start running, I said, it's hard to slow yourself down. Not so hard, he said, shaking his head. Do you know what I do when someone wants to get ahead of me in the traffic? When I used to be able to drive, I would raise my hand. He tried to do this now, but the hand lifted weakly, only 6 inches. I would raise my hand as if I was going to make a negative gesture, and then I would wave and smile. Instead of giving them the finger, you let them go and you smile. You know what? A lot of times they smile back. The truth is, I don't have to be in that much of a hurry with my car. I would rather put my energies into people. He did this he did this better than anyone I would ever know. Those who sat with him saw his eyes go moist when they spoke about something horrible, or crinkle in delight when they told him a really bad joke. He was always ready to openly display The emotions so often missing from my baby boomer generation. We are great at small talk. What do you do? Where do you live? But really listening to them without trying to sell them something. Pick them up, recruit them, or get some kind of status in return. How often do we get this anymore? I believe many visitors in the last few months of Muri's life were drawn not because of the attention they wanted to pay to him, but because of the attention he paid to them. Despite his personal pain and decay, this little old man listened the way they always wanted someone to listen. I told him he was the father everyone wishes they had. Well, he said, closing his eyes. I have some experience in that area. The last time Muri saw his own father was in a city morgue. Charlie Squards was a quiet man who liked to read his newspaper alone under a street lamp on Tremont Avenue in the Bronx. Every night when Muri was little, Charlie would go for a walk after dinner. He was a small Russian man with a ruddy complexion and a full head of grayish hair. Muri and his brother David would look out the window and see him leaning against the lamp post, and Muri wished he would come inside and talk to them. But he rarely did, nor did he tuck them in, nor kiss them good night. Muri always swore he would he would do these things for his own children if he ever had any. And years later, when he had them, he did. Meanwhile, as Muri raised his own children, Charlie was still living in the Bronx. He still took that walk, he still read the paper. One night he went outside after dinner. A few blocks from home, he was accosted by two robbers. "Do you West Germany?" one said, pulling a gun. Frightened, Charlie threw down his wallet and began to run. He ran through the streets and kept running until he reached the steps of a relative's house, where he collapsed on the porch. Heart attack. He died that night. Muri was called to identify the body. He flew to New York and went to the morgue. He was taken downstairs to the cold room where the corpses were kept. "Is this your father?" the attendant asked. Muri looked at the body behind the glasses, the body of the man who had scolded him and molded him and taught him to work, who had been quiet when Muri wanted him to speak, who had told Muri to swallow his memories of his mother when he wanted to share them with the world. He nodded and he walked away. The horror of the room, he would later say, sucked all other functions out of him. He did not cry until days later. Still, his father's death helped prepare Muri for his own. This much he knew. There would be lots of holding and kissing and talking and laughter and no goodbyes left unsaid. All the things he missed with his father and his mother. When the final moment came, Muri wanted his loved ones around him, knowing what was happening. No one would get a phone call or a telegram or have to look through a glass window in some cold and foreign basement. In the South American rainforest, there is a tribe called the Disana who see the world as a fixed quantity of energy that flows between all creatures. Every birth must therefore engender a death, and every death bring forth another birth. This way the energy of the world remains complete. When they hunt for food, the Disana know that the animals they kill will have a hole in the spiritual well. But that hole will be filled, they believe, by the souls of the Disana hunters when they die. Where there no men dying, there would be no birds or fish being born. I like this idea. Muri likes it too. The closer he gets to goodbye, the more he seems to feel we are all creatures in the same forest. What we take, we must replenish. It's only fair, he says.